Alright, this is going to be a video on hand construction in tournament play. And I have a bunch of topics I want to try to hit, and so I don't know how coherent this will be, but I think it's going to cover a lot of things I find really important. It is also going to cover my Nephilim match against Midas in one of the finals of Nephilim, and sort of how I got to the hand I ended up using and why I think it had a large advantage. So, a lot of things to hit here. But I wanted to start by talking a bit about split level. My game was close to mono level. It was level 6, 7. So, that's pretty similar levels. So, similar in power. But I wanted to start by quickly talking about a few things for split level rule sets and what I think matters there. So, I think there's sort of three key ways to look at a card's value in split level play. And in the hand over here, the two cards I'm caring about are 8982 and 9844. Obviously, this hand is a bit silly. You wouldn't want your two high-level cards to be the same corner, but it's going to show my point. And two quick stories. Delial will be the hero of this story. Turds will be the villain. But it should be noted, both of them won the matches I'm referring to here. So no real heroes or villains here. They both played well. But my theory of hand building more aligns with how Deli played it. So, three key ways to evaluate a card in multi-level sets. And these will hold up for mono-level sets, but they're more about multi-level sets. Edge power. So, also corner value. You can call it a bunch of different things. This card has A9. This card has 9-8. Though two different ways to get 9-8. This card's 8-8. This card's 7-7. This card's 7-7. High edge just gives a much higher chance of, having a potential safe play at some point. And also given that most cards, sorry, I didn't mean to play there, most cards on a level are going to not have, maximal values. As cards run down, it becomes more and more likely that your high edge has a chance to be safe. And sometimes is even at the very start, and that, of course, has a lot of value. It also means in a lot of adjacent corner setups, picking totally random cards here, but it means that when this sort of half safety is created, this in between square and 4, if you have max number out, that is automatically at least temporarily safe. So having access to more maximal numbers is just more likely to make that happen. Here, this would also be safe. The second strongest number also has a chance, though that chance is substantially reduced. I also think on second turn especially, a sort of theory of first and second turn is, and I've talked about this a lot in various forms, but essentially if combo was off and first turn could capture at every point they wanted to, first turn would win automatically. And that's true even if second turn can also capture at every turn they want to. So this sort of leads to a thesis of first turn likes things to be easy to take, second turn likes things to be difficult to take, because that's when it's going to be harder for first turn to achieve their always capture strategy. Note, combo confuses this a lot, and second turn can also survive via combo, but second turn usually survives at least in part because they set up things first turn had difficulty taking. And the higher edge values you have, the higher corner values, the more likely you will have strong outfacings in various spots that give first turn those challenges. So I think, imagine a hand of 8-8-6-6s. I think on first turn, this is quite powerful. It's, unless they happen to have a lot of 9s, this has a ton of capturing ability, a ton of combo potential, especially if we throw in some 8-8-7-6s, if it's not all 8-8-6-6s. This is really viable. On second turn, I think it is much, much weaker. It is so hard for on the second to last turn of the game for it to put something down the opponent cannot take. It have such an easier time overpowering whatever you do when they need to. And it's so hard when you're given these kind of half safety squares like this one to just be able to occupy it safely when your highest number out is an 8 and they have 9s and 10s. So I think there's a bunch of cards that are inherently good at capturing and not so good at being safe. And those will generally be cards I'm going to define as more first turn oriented cards rather than second turn oriented cards. Of course, there are cards that are fantastic at both things. Think about Squall or Cypher. an A964. A964 has a very high corner value, the highest you can get without rares, the highest edge value, and it has quite a lot of capturing and total power, right? The 6 is a decent third number, and having a 10 on a card automatically makes that 6 a little better because same wall possibilities make that 6 often work as at least a 7 in raw power. The 6 and the 4 combine to take 8s. A cool thing about A964s is except for 10s, they can inherently plus wall basically every number, or same wall. 9s, they can same wall with the A and the 9. 8s, they can plus wall with the 6 and the 4. 7s, they can plus wall with the 9 and the 6. 6s, they can same wall with the 6 and the 10. 5s, they can plus wall with the 9 and the 4. 4s, they can same wall with the 4 and the 10. And 3s or less, all 4 of their cards can take. So even if they don't have combo potential, it's so easy for them to sweep up low numbers. And if you look at other cards and try to find cards that have this feature, I think A865s also do this, but I'm pretty sure it's nothing else. A964s just have more play against different numbers than basically everything. Which is really cool. Love A964s. And they're a card that can work in a lot of ways and do a lot of productive things. But back to what we're talking about here. What was I talking about here? Yes, corner values really important. Edge values are strong. Second thing to care about. Try power. Try directionality. And here's where my story comes into play. In the Carver finals, Turds versus Vialva, watching the games, I kept wanting Turds to switch out his 9A44s. Because it's just so easy to imagine scenarios. You know, if it's over here, it often is a double capture. But if it's here, it usually is limited to double captures and is never getting that third, or very rarely. And if we drop it in kind of random squares, it often drops to single captures. The 8982, however, has a much better chance dropped in one of its bad squares to get a double capture. And this is especially going to be true in split level sets when there are a lot of weaker cards running around. If everything is an A944, then 8982's chance to double capture probably not that high. You know, A944s have some numbers that are difficult for it to take. It needs to be lined up right. But if there are a lot of weaker cards running around, then the 8982 just has a much better chance to end up with a multi-capture at the end. And this gets into kind of the offensive versus defensive card again, where I think 9A44 is fundamentally a kind of defensive card with its high edge value. Now, on a split level set, 8982 is pretty good defensively too, right? There's lots of cards that are just significantly lower than it in raw power and in edge strength. But it also has this tri-directionality that lets it sweep at the end. So Turds used 9A44s, and I really thought that meant it was hard for him to find ties or to push for advantage. He eventually did win. 9A44s are good cards. I could easily be wrong here. I'm just putting forth my kind of thesis of card value. Then there's a story with Deli. Deli, I think, was playing one of the tournaments I was running before TTA came back, and he had an 8982, and it looked like a beautiful starter, one of these squares. I forget which. It looked great. And he thought about it a little, but not much, and then he played Far Away. Now, both of these cards, it makes sense to, start over here and have both of your cards facing upright and play well. But he specifically identified 8982 as my win condition. If I can fill up squares over here, 8982 is going to sweep so many things, is going to be such powerful effect. I have excellent winning chances. And I just don't think you can say the same thing for 9A44. I think 8982 is probably a little weaker of a card, maybe a weaker card on second turn, though its ability to try take is still so valuable. But on first turn, it's just a much better finisher. And I think it really stuck with me when he said that he so quickly identified, because he had a bunch of powerful cards. This card is tri-directional, and it looks like it matches up pretty well with the opponent's hand. This card is my win condition. I am holding on to it, and I'm going to find another starter. Even if using it now has by far the most value now, I'm not interested. And I think him using it then would have been a perfectly good move that would have probably led to a tie. A tie where he has a little pressure. As it was, I think he won that game, and I think he had significantly more pressure. And so I think, especially on split level sets, tri-power really matters. Often the disadvantage of Tri-Power is you're giving up edge value, you're a little weaker in the main two directions than the big corners will be, and if all cards are the same level, that can be enough of a drop-off, sorry, didn't mean to play that, for the card not to be good. But once you get to split levels, there's enough stuff it's sweeping that it's just gonna play so well. And I think Tri-Power cards are really important. And yeah, I think fundamentally we should learn from Delhi here and think maybe a little more about using tri-directional cards. You know, maybe 9187 on level 8 is probably an underused card that has won me tournament games against very good players. You know, there are definitely underused cards that have tri-directional power. The last thing is just dynamism, synergy. Dynamism. I don't want to confuse these terms. Can your card take the high numbers that are relevant? 8982 has some ability to take 10s, same wall or plus walling off the 8s. It has very good ability to take 9s if they're on the right side of the board. 9844 has some ability to take 9s, some ability to take 10s, right? Just generally checking, can these cards handle the main threats? 5883 plays somewhat decently against some 10s, and has some play against 8s itself with its backside. 4577 has some ability to handle 9s and 10s. We can see why these might be good lower level cards at playing with higher level cards. But another part of card evaluation is just going to be, and this is even more true I think on Monolevel, can these cards take the numbers I need them to be able to take? As we know, first turn is a little more about capturing than second turn, but both turns are often about playing a high value thing, strong outfacing numbers, that you can recapture more easily than they can capture it. And having ways to capture those high numbers is key to both stopping the opponent doing that and being able to do it yourself. So that's my quick kind of gibberish on 8982 versus 9844. The more split level it is, the more you should play 8982, and the less you should play 9844. Now, Turds' game was level 6 through 10, use one from each level, which is not that big a split level compared to some we've seen in Nephilim. So there's definitely an argument that this was still the right choice, but my instinct is the 8982 is the more powerful card. Alright, that's part one on split levels and the three main components of card evaluation. I guess I want to throw out one more thing, which is from one of the Nephilim games I played. My opponent used a 1777 on a split level set, but all the higher levels. And level 10 is basically crushing 7s, right? Level 9 has a lot of stuff that outpowers 7s. So does level 8. So does level 7. So does level 6 even. 7 is sort of the lowest number any of those will possibly use on their high edge, on their strong side, or on their tri-powered side. And what that means is, while it does have some coverage of 10s, and it was a rule set where not many 10s were available, so I don't think that mattered much, it's trying to be tri-directional, but I don't think it's actually achieving it, because the 7s are just so often outpowered by every high thing available. And this is why, if everything was an A944, that doesn't mean you should throw in an 8982, because that card gets a lot worse there, right? As power goes up, the 8982 loses value, because it has only very specific coverage of A944s, and they can overpower it basically whenever they need to when in mass. So it's more as levels get more and more split that the 8982 gets better. But that doesn't mean the 1777 gets better. The 1777 still might be just overpowered by everything. And because of its lower kind of raw corner power, there's a fair chance it doesn't really work as a tri-directional card either. Alright, part 2. I'm going to switch views. What cards are actually good? Going through cards, what I did and what I've done for most rounds of this tournament is I've just gone through looking at every card available and just eliminating the ones I didn't like and having a little notepad where I wrote down every, I typed it, but where I typed every card I like. Just every one, and I divided them up into the 4 corners, so cards that fit in 1, cards that fit in 3, cards that fit in 7, cards that fit in 9, up-down cards, left-right cards, balanced cards, and cards that might not fit in but that appeal to me. So the stipulations for my match against Midas were level 6-7 must use 2 level 6s, at least 2 level 6s, and every card must have 2 even numbers and 2 odd numbers on it. So the first thing we notice is 4-6-8-7 is banned. And we're going to get back to the importance of that, but it means a lot of these cards are just banned. 8-8-2-5 is banned, 4-6-7-6 is banned. These all have 3 even numbers. 7-5-6-6 is allowed. Do I like 7-5-6-6? I do not. I don't think it's a useless card. I think there's some synergies available with it that can be fun, but I would not run it in a tournament if I had kind of anything else I could run. One is terrible edge value, right? The max available is 8-8. The max available on the level 6 cards is also 8-8. You know, I'm that makes me just already, I'm running 8-8s, I'm running 8-7s. I'm just so unlikely to run 7-7s. Some chance I run 8-6s, but it's pretty low, and there's no chance I'm running anything else. It's just giving up way too much power, and this is bad power. Also, is its tridirectionality actually that good? Well, when the levels are close, probably not, because it's not going to be this whole range of numbers to take. You know, there aren't going to be 4s to sweep up, which this is incredible at doing, this Astaroth. They're going to be, you know, 7s and 8s, and its tridirectionality doesn't affect those at all. Does it have good dynamism? Well, the 7 and 5 can take 8s, and that's it. This is a very low power card. I would not run it. 8-6-3-7. This is arguably the closest thing we can get to the mighty 8-7-6-4. And hopefully you can see when I highlight a card, because it turns pink. This is a pretty good card. The 8 and the 6 combine nicely to handle 8s. The 8-7 is the second highest edge value available. The 8-7-6 is the second highest tridirectional power available. And the synergy is it has an 8 and a 6, and that can take some 8s. And the 3 and the 6 maybe can hit 7s sometimes. It doesn't seem great on that front. The 8-7-6-4 would be much preferred. But something I realized quickly on this set, which is just fascinating, is like, think of the classic level 7, 7-5, 7-5. Just so good at sweeping 8s, right? Just dominates against 8s. Such a powerful card against 8s. But you can't do it here because, of course, it is 4 odd numbers. So what if you started 7-5? Where could you go from there? Well, you can't have another 5 to further power up that 7 to handle 8s, because that would be a 30 odd number. You can't have a 3 to power up the 5, because that would be a third odd number. Suddenly, you need 2 even numbers. So you need gaps of 2 to fight 8s, right? A 6 versus 4, a 7 and a 5, stuff like that can plus wall 8s. 8-7-6-5 is not a card that exists. That would have 2 gaps. 7-6-5-4 is a card that exists. There is exactly 1 at level 6, but it is very low power. The only card you can have that can have 2 gaps on it that isn't that 7-6-5-4 is 8-6-5-3. So if you want to cover 8s multiple ways on one card, that is the only reasonable way you can do so. Which means 8s are very strong here. 7-5-7-5s don't exist. 8-6-4-6s do not exist. 8-7-6-4s do not exist. The power of 8s in general and 8-8s is much higher than it would normally be. It's a really important realization, and it means 8-6-3-7 is a pretty useful card because at least it has 1 good coverage of 8s. I think if you're going to only have one thing covering 8s, you actually want it to be where your strong side is facing, because otherwise the game gets messy, where like, if the 6-3 part was the part that covered 8s, then you're covering 8s, but you want to be facing the other way, and the card's going to kind of get confused between squares. If you set up for where it can capture 8s, well, it's terrible at anything else. If you set up for where it can't capture 8s, then as soon as 8s hit, that's a little unpleasant. So I think you want the 6 next to the 8, and I think you do want kind of the powered up 8 to be your way of handling things. So 8-6-3-7 I put down as a corner for 9. 8-5-1-8 I put down as a corner for 9. But I did not end up very interested in 8-8-5-1s because 8-8-5-3s are available, and those have more play against 8s. And 8-8-3-1s are available at level 6, and those also have more plays against 8s. A lot of these cards aren't legal. 7-1-8-6, you can get this kind of value at level 6, and also I'd just rather an 8-6-3-7. I don't There's not reason for me to take a 1 when I can have a 3 as the last card. This card's banned. This card's banned. For some reason, I realized 8646s were banned and 8636s were banned, but it took me a bit to realize 8656s were also banned. I actually did list this card for a bit. Too many odds. 8754s. We haven't talked about those yet. I did put this card down in the up-down category. 8754s are the closest thing you can get to 8764s, and they play well against 8764s. They also play really well against 8646s because 8646s are so good at hitting 8s and 6s that having more odd numbers in your hand kind of messes with them, and they start losing value, and 8754s are good cards. But what if we established about the rule set? 8s are really powerful. And 8574s are just not nearly as good at dealing with like 8s and 8-8 corners as 8764s are or 8646s are. So we've gotten rid of the main threat to 8-8 corners, and 8754s play well against the other dynamic options, but not so well against 8-8 corners. So at first I was thinking I'm going to use 8754s. I think these are the best cards left. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought 8-8s are so much better than usual. And all the cards I like using 8754s against, I think are banned. So I think 8754s lost a bunch of value compared to their regular use. But I listed all of them. So this I would list as an up-down card. Bunch more banned cards. Listed 8736 as a corner for 7. 4767, this is a card we haven't talked about. I think fundamentally can't really be viewed as a 3-power card. In a world of 8s and 7s, it really needs to be touching the right wall to handle them. And the thing about 3-power cards is it's not so much when they're on their wall, they're really good. It's kind of the more they land on a random square, the more they have a chance to have a useful capture or two. And 4767 doesn't really. I also think 7-7 is just quite weak in a world of 8-8s. You know, this is one way to plus wall 8s, but handling 7s is not what's important here. The thing about 8s is, if they're good, they handle 7s on their own, just they overpower them. I did write these down, the 4764 type things, but I quickly moved off them. 7683 I wrote down, though this is not so much a corner card, and I was definitely more interested in corner cards. 2787 is the max tri-power you can have. I definitely did write them down. I don't have a good sense of how to evaluate 877s. Obviously, it's pretty good edge. It's really good tri-power. This is my preferred configuration on most rule sets, 2787, rather than like 2778, because this way I could use it as a good corner for 2 different corners, potentially as a starter. I'd rather not use a 7-7 corner starter, a 7-8 corner the opponent needs to have an answer to, while a 7-7 corner, they're likely to have an 8 in every direction, so they're inherently going to have answers to. A 7-8 corner has the potential to pose them problems that a 7-7 corner probably won't. So 2787 has a chance to be a good starting corner in 1 or 3, while 2778 would only have a chance to be a good starting corner in 3. So this was a card I was interested in, but I don't feel comfortable evaluating 2787s. They're good edge value, they're good try value, and they're really nothing on a dynamism front. And I tend to not love cards like that, though historically I've underestimated them. This might be a better card than I think, but I did move off them. Wyvern and 7872 are probably the stronger versions, though. Bunch more banned cards. We've talked about 8761s. We've talked about 6477s. 8383. I'd just rather have an 8853 configuration. The 3s and the 8s, there's no 10s to handle. I'm not interested. 8655. This is legal. The corner value, not great. The tri-power, basically non-existent. And the synergy, it does have an 8 and a 6. I just much rather an 8736, right? The difference between a 5 and a 7 I think is huge. The difference between a 5 and a 3, not so big. I care a lot more about powering up the strong side of the card than keeping the weak side solid. Sadly, 6368s are banned. 8853s, great cards. We've been talking about 8-8s. 8-8s I think are so powerful on this set, and this is the best 8-8 option you have. 6, 7, 8, 3. We've talked about this. I like them. I do like the 6 and the 8 to be touching. I think on average, the highest, if you have a sort of 3-directional card, the best form on average is with the highest number surrounded by the other 2, rather than sort of 3 ascending numbers, where the highest is one of the weak numbers next to it. Because if you look at this card as a I want to go down, often you end up with the 3 being a relevant number, and you really don't want that. Well, if this was 3, 7, 8, 6, and you thought this is to go down, often all 3 of your numbers relevant to the game are going to be more powerful. So that's my preferred version, but there's definitely arguments both ways. I don't feel that strongly. A bunch of banned cards. This card's legal. Again, didn't consider it much. 2, 7, 5, 8. This seems just low power in a world of like 8, 8, 5, 3, right? Or 8, 7, 5, 4. You know, why accept the 2 here? 1, 8, 5, 8, same thing. Why accept the 1 when I can get a 3? 7, 8, 4, 5 definitely made my list. I should say 6, 7, 8, 3 did make my list. I just was hoping not to use it. 4, 7, 5, 7s are banned. 6, 6, 8, 4s are banned. A lot of banned stuff. Again, 8, 5, 6, 5, no interest. 5, 7, 4, 8 made the list. What else we got? A lot of banned things. 8, 2, 7, 7, again, interesting card type. I prefer the version where the 8's sandwiched by the 7s. 6, 8, 7, 3 definitely made the list. Probably don't need to go through everything. 7, 7, 2, 8 made the list. But I hope this gives an idea of sort of where I was thinking. 5, 8, 8, 1 made it. Would rather a 5, 8, 8, 3. I'm not sure if one existed for that corner. 8, 5, 3, 8 made my list. 6, 3, 7, 8 made my list. 7, 2, 8, 7 made my list. Sadly, 7, 5, 7, 5 banned. Sadly for pure power levels. Interestingly for the rule set. 6, 3, 8, 7 did, though again, not really the one I wanted to use. 8, 8, 3, 5 did. 7, 4, 5, 8. 8, 3, 7, 6. Again, not my preferred configuration, but it's fine. 4, 8, 7, 5 certainly did. 5, 4, 8, 7. 5, 8, 8, 3. But you can see, I limited down to a few card types I liked, and I stopped there. And I wrote them down such that I could easily see, here are all the corner cards I'm considering for 1, here are all the corner cards I'm considering for 3, all the ones for 7, all the ones for 9, and then I could just select from them. And if a type of card I needed didn't exist, if I wanted an 8-7 corner for a corner and there wasn't one I liked, I would scrap the hand idea and go until I liked all the cards in the hand. We should look at level 6s briefly, because those were relevant. 7, 3, 8, 2 is legal. I wasn't excited about it. Also, 7, 8, 4, 3s are legal, so why... it's not highlighting for some reason. So let me reload. There we go. If 7, 8, 4, 3s are available, not sure why I'd go with 7, 8, 3, 2s. What else we got? A lot of cards you can't use. Yeah, here's a 4, 7, 3, 8. This did make my list. Another 8, 7, 4, 3. 1, 8, 3, 8. This definitely made it as a side-to-side option. It's probably the best side-to-side option on level 6. I love that the 1, 3 can pick up 8s, and seemed appealing to me. Didn't end up being in my hand because I went much more cornery, but did consider using this card. 8, 6, 5, 3s. Very interesting. This isn't the configuration where I'll talk about it, though. Another 8, 7, 4, 3. Another 8, 8, 3, 1, this time a corner. Really like this. One thing I love about 8, 8, 3, 1s is... or 3 things I like. 8, 8 corner using a level 6 card. 8s are so powerful, and I can get it at level 6. That seems a very good effect. Point number 2. The 3, 1 actually plus walls other 8s. That's great. Sort of a counter to itself if it was a threat in the opponent's hand. And 3, the 1, 3 is so weak, it's easy for me to sweep. So on first turn, I might play it as its strong corner if the opponent's weak to it, but I can also chuck it in its weak corner. Maybe not as a starter, but just at some point in the game, and be like, this is really easy for all my cards to recapture. That seems great. 8, 5, 4, 5, it will be no surprise to you, I think is garbage. 8, 7, 4, 3 makes the list. Yeah, so 8, 6, 5, 3. These 2 cards. Ultros, and Chupon. They are the only cards available that capture 8s both ways. I don't love the edge value. 8/8s are available at level 6, 8/7s are available. Settling for an 8/6 just seems settling for something pretty weak. 6 just doesn't seem very powerful. The Directionality, 8/6/5 in a world of like 8/7/7s, again, I'm not excited about the number 6, I'm not excited about the number 5. But it's pure dynamism. Its ability to combo 8s, it has a way to plus wall 7s. I was confused how to evaluate this card because it's by far the weakest card in the first 2 categories that I seriously considered, but it is so strong in the third, and in a type of field where that power is rare. I did not end up running with an 8/6/5/3 hand, but I did come close. I thought these 2 cards as a pair did a really interesting and powerful effect. Any other card types I want to get to? Yeah, 8/7/5/2s. I think these are great. I think 8/7/5/2s are better here than 8/7/4/3s. There's no 9s to pick off, and I would rather the 5/7 and the 5/2 be able to pick off 7s and 8s than on an 8/7/4/3, the 7 and 4 can pick off some 7s. This just seems better. Of course, what's my preferred configuration? It's not this one. It is not this one. It is... Can we find one? It is this one. And I did indeed run a hand with Senna. I thought this was a great card. The 8/7 is good edge value. I strongly considered going 8/8 corners as well, but it was tricky with 8/8 corners because they're so hard for me to recapture, right? Like, it's just fundamentally really tough to take 8s, and so if they do happen to have them covered, it's tricky. I knew I wanted to run some 8/8 corners, but I really liked the 5/8/7/2s, and I ended up running a pair of 5/8/7/2s. But anyways, my suggestion is go through all the cards available, look through them, just pick out some card types you like, and grab every card of those and put them in a list. I find this a really useful thing to do. Alright, we took a while on that, so little behind schedule. We'll now return to this screen. And I'm going to put in the actual hands from my match, just so those can be seen. But I also want to talk a bit about different ways to build a hand. So, I think it's good to have intended starters. I think I have gotten into trouble historically just not having intended starters. It can be good to build around a starter, but it can be bad to commit to overly weak cards. So if you see in my opponent's hand, they have 3 cards. I was the blue player. They have 3 cards I like. 1 card I think is really bad. It has no play against 8s, or needs help from other cards to play against 8s. And it, is good at 7s, but I don't really think that matters. It also happens to line up terribly with my hand, which has exactly 1 sideways 7. But I think it's going to line up terribly with a lot of hands because so many hands have 8s. I was tempted to use 4/7/7/4s. I did consider them. They did actually make my lists, and then I removed them. But we're going to pretend they didn't because I think it was a mistake. I think I was sort of looking for something that could be a side-to-side or utility card and reaching at straws, and this was just not the way. It's just, what's our front? Does it have good corner value? Of course not. Does it have good tri-power of directionality? No. Does it have good dynamism if 8s are the threat? No. This is a pretty dead card. You can see why he used it. His starter ended up being here, and of course, if it was captured, from below, this would be the recapture. And this was a tricky part of this set, is it was really hard to come up with starters. Because if you have an 8/8 starter, say my hand, an 8/8 starter, it's just really hard to have this recaptured. The 4/8/5/7 can capture one way. I could set a card to capture the other, but whatever it was, it would have to be a major concession in my hand. For instance, if he went... here. If I take, he already has to recapture with an 8 facing 5. And it's very easy for me to have a move like this, and he's in serious trouble. You really don't want your recaptures to have an 8 facing 5, but the kind of most natural card to use, 8/7/5/4s, to be able to capture an 8, they need the 7/5 touching, And that 8 is probably going to be facing towards 5. If it's a corner card, it has to be facing towards 5, because it has to also be next to the 7. And so I kept trying to make 8-8 corner hands with 7-8s to recapture, but you can see this 7-8 is just a really uncomfortable recapturing card. It's a very difficult set because all the stuff you'd want to work, it was just hard to support numbers. And one reason I went with 2 8-8 corners is because I just thought there is a good chance they're just dead to 8-8s, right? That they play some move and like I can play an 8-8 and they just won't have it covered. And here, they wouldn't have. I ended up not playing this move because I thought this would probably be enough to tie for them. I have no threat in 4. I can play something like here, but it's a little annoying. I do set up in 5, but it's a little annoying. I don't have great recaptures in 9. Not that I need them, but I figured they could block 5 and probably tie pretty comfortably here. So this wasn't the path I took. But there's just such a good chance that they're not going to be able to take these 8-8 corners. The pure corner value is just so strong. This one they can take, but only because they just set up against it. And I could have gone with this and intended to maybe recapture. Though I potentially have a problem down the road. Not this way, I guess, because I have combo in 2, but I don't have a recapture in 7 here. But I just thought there's such a good chance that the hand cannot deal with certain 8-8s. 8-8s are so powerful on this set, and this may make it a bad video for general hand strategy, because few sets will have 8-8s be quite as powerful, or something like them be quite as powerful as they are here. But we can see there was an exploit, I think, to the set, where the stuff that deals with 8-8s the best, 7-5-7-5 and 8-6-4-6, and to a lesser extent 8-6-3-6 and 8-7-6-4, when those are all eliminated, all cards that have multiple ways to plus wall 8s, you get situations like this where 8-8s are really strong. And I actually was comfortable running these 8-8s without particularly having many recaptures on them, just because I thought it was so unlikely they'd have 2 covered. And I was really close to running a hand of like 3 8-8s I had no recaptures on, because I just thought 8-8s are that good with their main threats taken away. And that might have been a little over optimistic. I'm sort of glad I settled on a 2 8-8 hand, but that's what I was thinking. And I think my opponent made the very kind of conventionally reasonable hand choices. They have 3 good corner cards. 8-7-5-4s are good cards. They have a side-to-side card and an up-down card that are good at recapturing their starter, and they're good at recapturing, right? If I go here and they go here, they have a really nice way to recapture this card. If I take from here and they go here, and I have a capture in 5, okay, a little less comfortable recapturing this one. But no, they would do it the other way. They do it this way. And if I go 5, they have a really nice way to recapture it. You know, hand that really makes sense as a starter hand, but fundamentally doing so, and seems to use good cards, doesn't cover 8s at all. Or very little. And doesn't kind of identify the really important threat here. It's a very interesting set. Easy to go wrong. I ended up playing not the best move here. So I played here, just setting up my 8-8-5-3 to have everything. This move would have been better. Really hard for him to meet this move, because he can't really play in 4, because inherently, if he ever does play in 4, I have this just devastating combo. And if he can't play in 4, it's tricky for him to work around it because he has such different cards for 2 and 4, right? If he holds on to this for 2, well, it's probably a dead card everywhere else. If he holds on to this for 4, A, it's not actually that great in 4, it doesn't capture 7, and B, it's a dead card everywhere else. So I think that, I mean, the solver says that would have been a better move, should have played that. But I played here, and it's just really tough for him because my 8-8-5-3 is so good and covers so many squares. And even without using the big corners, which also would have been good moves, this applies just so much pressure on him. And it turns out the 8s and 5s play pretty well together. He went here, which gave him some combo play, 7, 8, 4, 5, and 6, and 8. You know, he gives himself 2 squares. I really thought about blocking one of those squares. I think this is a pretty good move, but I was so hesitant to let such a powerful card out of my hand Now I still have a different card that has the same in 2, so I still have coverage of a lot of things, and it's unlikely I'll have to go in 6, right? I'm giving up 6, but when you play across from a square, that's kind of the square that's most okay for you not to have, right? I still really need to have this, because if I go here, he's never blocking here. But if I go here, the main 2 moves are in 6 and 8. If they go 6, well, then it doesn't matter that I don't have 6 anymore. And if they go 8, they kind of have to do so this way, and I can skirt around it, right? I can play in kind of 3 or 7 and end up playing in 2 as my last move and leave 4 to them, especially because they have nothing in 4 either, and I can choose where they go last. So I think something like this would have been very good as well. I ended up this turn going for this idea, just noting they basically have no play in either of 4 or 8. He ended up blocking 4 with the clever point that if I combo here, he does have combos in both squares and can do something like this and get that tie. So, but on the other hand, I can just block 8 and he cannot take his combo because I still have the plus here, and this was just a win. He did point out after the game the idea of playing here, which is very clever. Tries to achieve kind of the same thing, right? Because his idea with this move was if I occupy 2, he can go 1 and leave 6 and 8 open, which are his combo squares. So if he goes in 2 immediately, again, keeping 7, 8, 4, 5 in the hand, has to do that, and doesn't flip 5 because he doesn't want to flip 5 because he needs to have combos on it. Very interesting defensive idea. And if I play an 8, he can block 4. I'd actually have to find a win in 6 to cut off his combo squares, because he really wants these 2 squares filled, so these are the last 2. So I'd really have to cut one of those off. But this is safe, and then it turns out he's basically dead everywhere, right? I mean, he's losing, but like this card just has one good square, and he can't go there immediately because I combo, and this card has no good squares. And if he gets this one out of his hand, well, then I just block the one he was good in. So, would have been a really good defensive idea. I don't know if I would have found 6. I'd like to think I would have, and we've been seeing the idea a bunch. Deli Oliver's Turds in Triad Wars 2, you see this idea. Piggy Man in Triad Wars 3 found the same idea in 6 in the exact same formation. Forget who it was against. Really wonderful games from both of them. So I'd like to think I would have found it. It's an idea we've been seeing. But this would have been a clever defense. Really good idea by Midas. But the position is already lost, and it's basically lost because the hand's just so outpowered. Yeah. Did I have other big things I wanted to hit? I wanted to show the game, because that was sort of technically the topic of the video, but it wasn't really what I was looking to talk about. Oh, another thing to like on cards is pairs do nicely when they do nicely. Which is to say, like, if you have a pair of cards, so the same cards but exactly opposite, it's really nice if they have 7s and 4s on them, or 8s and 6s, or 9s and 8s, or 6s and 2s, stuff that inherently plus walls itself. That was just something I wanted to mention somewhere in here. We've talked about exploiting the rule set. There's just always a chance that the highest edge value is going to be incredibly strong. And here I think it was with 8 8s. But I also think 8 7s were pretty good. And I also think your side-to-side or your up-down card is likely to be the worst fit in the hand and kind of the difficulty of picking a 5th card. And I don't really have good advice on that at the moment, but really worth thinking about what that is. And you really want it to end up with something where you're not accepting really low power. I think 4-7, 4-7, there are sets where it is not really low power, but in this set it was. Okay, last thing was potential game plans. Side starters, center starters, corner starters. So for a side starter, let's actually, should probably put in a side starter hand. So I'm gonna make one up whole cloth. But I think it's one I basically did consider. Should my last two cards be? Actually, let's make it a very similar hand to the one I used. And we'll put it against Midas's hand. Very similar hand. Major difference. The only difference, perhaps, is this 1838. So a move like this could be a side starter here or a side starter here. Quite naturally. The idea is just 5872 can always recapture from the other side if needed. I think here it actually might have played well, but I think in general the downside of this is I don't control 1 or 3, so they can always find safe, or 1 or 7, so they can always find safety there themselves. And if they can control 1 of 1 or 7, right, if they have a plus wall in one of those squares, either one, you know, let's pretend they could take anything I put in 1, well, they can go in 7, and suddenly I can't go in 1 because they have to flip. Obviously, Midas's hand doesn't here, and this probably would have been a pretty good hand against his. But I think it's just very easy. If he has any coverage of 8s in one of these squares, then it's really hard for me to play this. And I'm never going to have coverage of all his 8s because it's just so hard to have coverage of 8s. And because I'm making the move, he gets to make the response and choose which square I have to play in and which square he gets to. And so I think, generally speaking, these don't really work on this set. Because what you're going to need for a good side starter is you're going to need it to be, it's really hard for them to play safely in either of the two squares next to it, either of the corners, and you have good ways to recapture. Here, I wasn't convinced I'd have good ways to recapture. I thought I might have good ways, because having 8s out, again, 8s are so strong. I was actually more drawn to side starters than I usually am, because 8s are so strong. But the fact that I was most likely going to have no coverage of their 8s at all meant I thought I was just giving up too much ground too easily and was not at all guaranteed to have a good recapture. Because, you know, again, if they have 1 covered and not 7, they can go in 7, and suddenly what am I going to do? I don't have a capture in 8. I don't really want to play in 1 because they can combo my 8 out. What am I going to do? One benefit to using a card like this as a starter is I have 2 chances to get them, right? If this one, they have, you know, one of them covered, but this one they have 0 covered, well, then I can do it this way, and the hand is pretty adaptable to be able to go either, right? I have lots of multi-captures. So this was one way to go, and I think here, like, this is a, you know, reasonable situation. Like, I think this puts decent pressure against Midas's hand. But even in its, you know, best form, like, let's say he takes safety. I take safety, I do my standard thing, and he goes, like, here. Is this that amazing for me? I don't know. Like, right, it's easy to see the game, like, I block 5, he takes back, I capture, and we get a tie, you know, something like that. It's easy, I think, for something like that to happen. So, yeah, I don't know. I tend not to have much faith in side starters. I did consider them here, but I think you just need more control over the adjacent squares. And I could not have, you know, you couldn't have a, you know, 5-7-5-7 that would control both, because that wasn't allowed by the rules. So while the rules powered up 8s, it also weakened coverage of 8s, and you really need to have that coverage as well. So I thought a side starter didn't make sense. Center starters, I think, are heavily reliant on being able to build synergies. I think one cue that a center starter is viable, and the reason I also considered them, is that levels 5, 7, and 10 are just much more likely to have synergies between the numbers, good ways to cover things, the cards just fitting together in that perfect fashion where you cover everything. I think levels 5, 7, and 10 are the most likely to have center starters, and to me that makes them some of the most interesting levels for hand games, because they're the ones where the most different types of starters, I think, are viable. Because they really, the cards just synergize so easily together. And that doesn't make them the best or most interesting levels. It is somewhat to my taste. In my interview with Akiyama, he mentioned he really doesn't like level 7 because everything's too clean. Everything comes together too easily. But in my eyes, levels 5, 7, and 10 are a queue that center starters may work. I couldn't get the synergies working well. And the real reason I couldn't was as soon as I started looking at, a center starter move. Say, again, I'd put in a different hand, but something like this. I would just ask, like, do I cover 8-8 corners? And I'd keep looking at the different 8-8 corners and being like, not really. No, not really. That doesn't look great. And I don't know. I didn't think I covered things. I could create some synergies, but to do so, I had to run a card. Like, I think the most interesting one I made, my starter was 6, 7, 2, 7, and 5. And I had some neat ways of playing off it. My 8, 7, 4, 5s in that hand played off it really nicely to take back exactly each other, but not 8, 7, 5, 4s that faced in different directions. Certainly not 8, 8s that faced in other directions. It ended up just feeling like, oh, this looks really neat until the other person gets to have 5 cards too. And then I just don't know what it's doing. And also, especially as we talked about, 6, 7, 2, 7 is a really weak card, especially on second turn, but weak on both. I just don't want to run weak cards like that. I think it's just losing a lot of value. So I think for a center starter, you want decent coverage of corners. Here we know 8-8s are an issue, and I'm just never going to have that coverage. And you might say, but with corner starters like the one Midas played, he also had a problem with 8-8 corners. But with a corner starter, at least you're building something of your own. And as we saw in the game, if we go back to that, 1 second. My voice is dying. That's okay though. Should wrap this video up someday. His corner starter actually gave him more play against, one of my safe corners, because suddenly he has 2 safe cards, right? And so even though I had safety, I give up a half safety in the between square. He has an 8 facing down. He suddenly has cards to work with. And so I think corner starters are just kind of a better start unless your center has a ton of synergy and a ton of control. And I love center starter hands in hand games. Like, when I can make them and they work, they're just a blast to play. They can be very powerful. Really like them. Level 7 made me think, maybe I can build one. And I could not. I just had to give up too much power. Also, one other thing about Midas's hand, he doesn't have an 8 in every direction. I think that's a pretty big drop-off. And part of the reason is just this is a card with no 8s at all. So it's easier to not have an 8 in every direction. And also, going for the more dynamic 8, 7, 5, 4s meant didn't have the extra 8 power of an 8, 8 corner. So there's a bunch of reasons I just had very, very large hand advantage. And my actual win, I think, was mostly decided before the game. And during the game, I suspect he saw cleverer things than I did. Like, I think, this move, mistake. Still puts a ton of pressure on him, but I had a forced win. Did not find it. Made a mistake. And then after here, he found a nice way to create some synergy. And against my reply, spotted a way that really would have made it tricky from a game that was basically lost from the opening, right? Just basically immediately lost based on the hands involved, and yet found some interesting ways to complicate. So I would not say he was in any sense outplayed on the game, but I think he was outplayed before the game by a large enough margin that the game almost didn't matter. Which, I don't know if this is always true or always available, but it speaks to this being a really complicated rule set if you can get advantages that large against someone using a hand that seems normal. So the last thing I want to do is talk about corner starters. I think Midas's hand kind of did a traditional thing here, right? There's a corner starter, there's recapture cards, there's 2 other corners that provide general value. Now in general, for my opinion of 3 corners builds, this is almost how you'd want to do it, but I think the 7, 4, 5, 8 you probably don't want here. I think in general, just chucking a card somewhere for me. I'll chuck the card I played in the game. I think these hands work a little better if one of your corners is for here and one of your corners is for here, just to keep the hand balanced once you play your starter. But a lot of people do 3 corners where you've got your 2 recapturers, which are side to sides and up downs, and you've got a corner, and you have an opposite corner that feels like it'll play better because it faces the action. But I do think the corner card for here, for 3 corner hands, is a little better. I also considered playing a 3 corner hand myself. I would have had the 3rd corner here. I just couldn't get the recaptures to be good because the 2 fundamental problems. One is, I also considered running 4/7 4/7s to do this, and I think they're just too weak. I think that's just too big a concession. And the fact that all the 8/7 5/4s recapturing had their 8 facing 5 meant, and I've talked about this earlier in this video, like, these kinds of positions are just a problem. Maybe you don't lose. Let's check. Nope, this is a forced loss. You know, this is a win for blue. But it's so easy to get these positions where if you do tie, you have to be very lucky to have a tie here. And you just don't want to get into them. They're horrible. So you also don't want your recapture to have a maximum number facing 5. That's a really important trait to corner hands. So I'll say it again. When you're playing a corner hand and you intend a corner starter, make sure your recaptures do not have the max number facing 5. Because this is not what you want out of life. Lastly, there's the 4 corner build. You know, you have a card for each corners and an extra card. My hand is basically an instance of that. I am hoping my hands have some cards of some tri-directional value. You know, this card has some ability to hit 7s with the 5/2. This card has some ability to hit 8s with the 5/3. Also, with so many of these cards with 5s around, I was hoping they could play off each other and set up synergies that made them capture more things. The one potential weakness I was concerned about is if I make a move like this, which was a move I had in mind pre-game as a potential starter even, it's just kind of annoying. I only have 1 recapture in 4. And that's part of the reason I made the first move I did, is I thought the 5s up and down are kind of annoying for me to recapture in my own hand. Therefore, I want to play a lot of diagonal setups to maximize pluses and sames, making up for that potential weakness, which was a big reason that I went here, already making sure there's multiple ways I can take that 5 from above without overpowering it. I have 2 different ways to take it, and not even including my overpower. And I wanted to be maximizing how much of that kind of stuff I set up, and a move like this, which was a better move, did not do that. So that's one reason this was in my head, was I knew the biggest concession my hand made was it was very weird at retaking itself up down. A few other traits. 4 corner hands are pretty good for not having repeated weaknesses. One thing I would usually do, which I didn't do here, is if my corner, you know, is for here, then my corner for this corner will not have the same weak number. So at the bottom, this is a weakness to the left. So my corner here, I will usually have a weakness up. I did not manage that in this hand using cards I liked. I didn't find a way to do that. But one thing is, you know, if you have 4 corners, trying to have only 1 really terrible number in each direction, because if you have 2, sometimes you're directionally exploitable. So that's something to be careful of. Anything else to hit? Yeah, 4 corner hands. They're the most common type of hand. You kind of have a card for each corner. You have a utility card. Things to be careful about. 1. Do evaluate the corners correctly, right? Do you want max corner? Do you want something more dynamic? Do you want something with a better 3rd power? You know, just general card evaluation, really relevant. You know, if we each pick a 4 corner hand, but you pick 8/7 5/5s and I pick 8/7 6/4s, I'm going to win most of the time because my cards are just much more powerful. And just picking the more powerful versions of cards is just useful. And the second thing is, you do want to have starters in mind. And this can be hard to do with 4 corner hands because the cards don't necessarily naturally take each other. And if they do, sometimes they can take each other. You know, if your corner for 1 can be retaken by your corner for 7, that seems really nice because it lets this card be both a corner and a recapture that helps your starter. But it's easy for it to have the problem that the 8 faces 5. So actually, more often, and this is a little surprising, you want your recapturing corner to be the one for the far corner. This can be a better recapture because it doesn't have that high number facing 5 that lets you walk into such terrible setups as this one. And so usually what you want is something like, I'll just throw together cards that weren't actually allowed, but it should give a better example, is something like, oh, these were allowed cards. I don't think this is a particularly good build here, just to say. But it's just to say something that makes a little more sense to me. If you go here, you have the recapturing card be the opposite corner. You don't have the issue of a high number facing towards 5. And you also have a secondary starter that has a recapture if needed. And you have one card, your side-to-side card. Again, not a card I love, but your side-to-side card is potentially a recapture on both. Here it's not a very clean recapture, but I didn't have time to actually, put together a good hand here. So I think that can be a nice way if you have these two opposite corners where they both capture each other, ideally with higher power than 5-3-8-6, like 9-8-5-4s or 9-8s are much nicer ways to do this on level 8. There are levels where there's better ways to do this. But this can be a way where you have two potential starters, your side-to-side card supports both, and then you keep the directional power after, if you have a corner for here and a corner for here, and that's often pretty good in the resulting setups. And so I guess that's my last thought on 4-corner setups. Hit a ton of ground here, probably not all that consistent, but I hope it's useful to someone. I've been asked to do hand building videos, and I guess I would conclude by saying the generic thing to do is a 4-corner build. And the most important thing there, I think, is making sure it actually does support 1 or 2 starter options and that you are using the most powerful cards available. I think center builds are harder to do. I didn't talk much about setting them up, but most rule sets, they're not going to make a ton of sense. Rule sets where they make more sense are specifically levels 5, 7, and 10, or massively split level sets where you chuck a low level in 5 that potentially your other cards either play off of or take really easily. Very viable way to go. Sides, you really want to control the next 2 squares. If you don't control the next 2 next to them squares, they're going to be an issue. I think that's probably even more important than having a good way to recapture yourself. I could be wrong on that front. I don't start with sides very often. Corners are going to be the standard build. You also want to make sure you don't have a directional weakness too many times in your hand. That makes it easy for the opponent to play against something and push for an edge. So, if you're doing like all, say, 8-7-6-1s as your corners, make sure you're never repeating ones for the same direction. And I guess that's it. I think some of this stuff was pretty basic, but some was pretty advanced, so hopefully it's useful. Advanced. Don't have the recapture of the max number facing towards 5. This is so important. This is so important. I did not heavily consider in this game. Let's actually bring one more thing up. In this game, I didn't seriously consider actually capturing immediately, but I'm curious what would have happened there. I thought I just had the 3 things that jumped out to me. I just thought were enough higher value that I didn't need to look at that, because I just thought this is safe. That seems pretty great, and I have a potential L, so this is quite promising. This just sets up 1 card both ways, and they do not have good squares. This seems great. And this, it's so hard for them to block 4, and if I block 4, that card's safe, and my card in 7 is safe. That seems really promising as well. So there was a bunch of things that really appealed, and I didn't think much about taking, but I'm actually wondering, what does he do here? It turns out that this is an absolute nightmare for him. The solver is saying it wants him to go in 9? I mean, if this is your move, I don't know what to say. But there is a tie in for it. This does tie. And this ties for the reason it doesn't have that 8 facing 5, right? If this was the only recapture, then my position would be just crushing. But he does have this recapture too. That is very important. So he would have been okay against this move. That's good that I probably didn't spend too much time on these options. So yeah, that's a whole lot on hand building. A lot of it's card evaluation. There aren't that many super distinct ways people standardly put hands together. So a lot of it's going to be figuring out which cards are going to play well. And some of it's going to be figuring out which cards counter the most likely stuff, and that takes a lot of experience, and I'm not great at that. But generally speaking, 4-corner builds where you have at least 2 potential corner starters are pretty appealing. And you don't want to necessarily just instantly play them, because sometimes the opponent has a directional weakness or something they have a problem with, and you can try to exploit that. I do like the 3-corner build. The Homer Hand video talks a bunch about that. Center and side starters, I think, have to be more carefully chosen. And if you go into each round of a corner thinking, how can I get a side starter working, or how can I get a center starter working, I think you're giving up equity. I think the optimal player is playing at least 50% corners and maybe a lot more. But I think like a minimum of 50%. If you're under 50% corner starters over a decent sample of tournament format games, doesn't have to be majors, but like, you know, Tezuka's Hand Tourney or Dorf's Battle of the Decks or whatever, if you're ending up with non-corner starters at least 50% over a decent number of games, I think you're giving up a bunch of value there. No idea where the actual number is, but I'm comfortable saying it is over 50%. And I guess we'll find a way to stop the video now. Do let me know if this was useful to anyone or you have thoughts. I think this is an underexplored area, and I really wanted to try to get some thoughts out there.